Well, thank you so much for that thought-provoking talk. I'm sure we have a lot of questions coming in, and I'll get us started if that's okay with you. Okay, here's a real simple one. Can you give us a simple explanation of the impossibility of time?
Well, basically, time uh, and matter are inseparable, and time is an aspect of matter being redundant. But and Einstein said that time is an illusion, albeit a tenacious one. And the basic idea is that without a concept of matter, you can't have repetitious, uh, redundancies, and therefore you can't have time. So um, if you want to have time, you require matter, and if matter is not real, you can't have, as I said in the talk, objective matter, and you can't really have a limitation called time. There are various aspects of time, and they're contradictory. Quantum physics has a sense of time as being a kind of a variable, a measurement. In general relativity, the concept of time is direction. Space time are inseparable. So, in some sense, relativity is about time being destiny, and in quantum physics, it's free will. So, even within physics, there's a contradictory definitions of time. So, that's the simplest explanation without getting too much into the physics of it. I assume you want to know what natural scientists think of time, and there isn't really a good definition of it. Mrs. Eddy, however, has a definition of time and its limitation. So I tell the students at Principia when they say I need more time, they're saying, "Oh, if I only had more limitation, I could finish my homework." And so it's the wrong approach. We have this misconception of time, and that's portrayed in physics as well.
Well, you approached the subject of infinite mind and infinite ideas. Can you explain how mind with a capital M creates and how matter, which is deemed to create according to common knowledge, how that does not create?
Well, matter, if you look at the limitations of it, should only be able to reproduce permutations on the existing data. In other words, different facets, but nothing new. When you get something entirely new, then it's coming from the infinite mind. And I think the Lenni Lenape people, the Delaware Indians, they had a name for God. It was Kushili Mukong. And that literally means he who creates us with his thoughts. So this concept of creation being the thinking of the infinite mind is not new, but the idea that the infinite divine mind is constantly creating is very much in line with where metaphysics and modern physics is going. This idea that God, that a source has to be there to create newness. So, yeah, it's the concept of in Christian Science, the infinite divine mind creates, and that creation is ongoing, conflicts with the idea that there can be a beginning or an end. And well, interestingly enough, the Big Bang may only be the latest Big Bang. The current cosmological thought is that two brains, BRANES, come together, not to be confused with, the brain. And they, in other words, two universes came together and created a singularity that caused the Big Bang. And so the Big Bang is not considered in state-of-the-art cosmology as the beginning. that there's an ongoing process of creation. And this is much more in line with the idea of an infinite mind without beginning or end. So once again, there's this interesting alignment of natural science with a more metaphysical idea.
Well, now, metaphysically, here's a question. How do you pray about the attack on the Christ that is rampant in our world right now?
Mrs. Eddy writes about Constantine being informed that one of his statues' head was cut off, and he touched his head and said, "I don't feel a thing." Well, the Christ is out of range of attack of any idea or notion that there can be anything but the infinite mind. And the way to pray about this is when you know there's only one infinite divine mind. Mortal thinking cannot exist in the presence of such prayer. And any evil, violent, or attacking thoughts disappear, and the person cannot think of them. And that's what makes metaphysical work so effective. It replaces the thoughts of error with the thoughts of the infinite divine mind, and the person can only act on what they can think. So it removes the error from thought and therefore from action. But the Christ is never within range of arrows of hate. Einstein said, "Arrows of hate have been shot at me, but they never touched me because they were from a different world." So he knew how to put evil thoughts in a different world.
Now, you talk about the relation between Christian Science and quantum physics. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Well, Mrs. Eddy wrote that through observation, invention, study, and original thought, mortal mind will outgrow itself, will outgrow all that's mortal, limited. Why shouldn't we be seeing this prediction of Mrs. Eddy's coming true? It's actually unfolding in the natural sciences that the limited and mortal way of thinking of things are being replaced with a more metaphysical view and an unlimited version of things. And it shouldn't come as a total surprise that this prophecy is coming true, as I said, but it's right now a bit of a mix. I would say where natural science, quantum physics has arrived at right now in Christian Science lingo, I would put it that mortal mind and matter are the same thing. But have they arrived at all as infinite mind? Well, getting there. There seems to be an instantaneous connectedness called entanglement that indicates that there is a reality that is not subject to, for example, the speed of light, but it underlies things. It's a bit subtle, but it's unfolding. And it was very difficult. It took the whole 20th century to catch up with the idea that there could be such a thing as intercommunication that exists underlying reality that is independent of distance, that you don't have to travel from A to B. But for the Christian Scientists, it shouldn't come as too much of a surprise to find that an idea of God is not any distance from another idea of God. Mm-hmm. So I'd say I would classify modern physics as unfolding in the metaphysical direction, and that it's a source of gratitude to the Christian Science community that things are heading in that direction. As I quoted in my talk, Mrs. A wrote that the material atom is an outlying falsity of consciousness. Well, I don't know if that's the first mention of material being a notion, that matter is a notion and not a subjective reality. not a substantial thing out there, but a thought. And it isn't, it's a notion of what if you had a limited version of ideas? And that doesn't work. The limited version is not the truth. The math is not in the chalk. And that's the big lesson of our age.
Here's a question that talks about the power of the Spirit. It says, the Bible tells us that Jesus went in the power of the Spirit to Galilee. Could you comment on how you think about the power of the Spirit, maybe how you define it? This questioner says, I have always thought of it as an instantaneous appearance.
Yes. Well, power in physics is, work over time. And, work has been described as energy, per second times distance. And so if you look into the physics definition of power, it's really interesting to compare that with the idea of omnipotence. Does God act over distance? Does God act over time? What does omnipotence mean exactly? And so I think going in the power of the Spirit means that you have an ever presence of infinite energy, you might say, that is completely unlimited. Even if you have only 5 loaves and 2 fishes, you can feed 5,000 people with it. You can do things like, and instantaneously the ship was at the other side of the Galilean Sea. There's no limit to the power of God because God doesn't have to apply force to something over distance. God is instantaneously there with all the energy in the universe, you might say. Energy is a bit of a tricky term, but I'll just say that Jesus going in the power of the Spirit means there was no stopping him. And that it was already a done deal. He didn't have to move from A to B, that he knew his mission would already succeed. And to me, that's what means the power of the Spirit. It's already accomplished.
Somehow I got muted. I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, this is this pinpointed question. Is there a naturalistic explanation for Matthew 2, verse 9, which says, and to the star which they saw in the east went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was? Can a star hover over a tiny manger without lighting up a whole planet?
Yeah, that's interesting. I like that. Well, as we know, the Earth rotates from the west to the east, so that the stars seem to move in the morning. The stars rise in the east and move to the west. And so the star does move throughout the night, and they could follow it to the west. There's an idea that 3 planets were in the conjunction that the Jewish astrologers felt was important to the Jews as a whole. And in about 8 to 6 BC, these 3 planets made a kind of an arrow and moved across the sky from the east to the west and could be followed. And I've heard astronomers explain that. It's interesting. It was an unusual conjunction of 3 planets. So the Jewish astrologers would have seen that, and that's actually happened. But I like the idea of a star as well. But stars do move from east to west, and if you follow it along the right latitude, they probably kept it at the zenith, and as it set toward Jerusalem, that's where they went. How it zeroed in on a manger, I'm not sure. That was really spiritual listening to fine tune to that extent. But in general, you could follow a star to the west.
Okay, this one is about perception of reality. It says, perception is reality, and the truth is negotiable, seems to be a recurring theme in world consciousness. You mentioned 2 + 2 = 4. This is a truth. How do we then find the truth, capital T, that cannot be negotiable?
Well, if it makes you free, it's the truth. So if you say, well, the truth the doctor told me is that I'm sick. Well, does that make you free? Okay, time to go back and check for the truth of that by using what Jesus told us to do. Does it make me free? Okay, well, I'm a material person. I'm going to die in 100 years. Does that make you free? No. Check again then. Okay, I am a spiritual idea that it exists forever, immortal in God's thought, and infinitely valuable because the infinite divine mind only makes one of me, and therefore I'm irreplaceable. Yeah, that's pretty freeing. So I would say that was closer to the truth. So it's a very, very, very simple rule. But if it makes you free, it's the truth. If it doesn't make you free, it isn't. And we have Jesus' word on that. And he was a pretty free guy. He was not limited very much. I think that that's a reliable source for telling the truth or not. And try it. Try it out. And I think you'll find that if you use that as a navigation tool to the truth, that you'll do pretty good.
Here's a question about objective matter. You had mentioned in the talk that it's a scientific fact that there's no such thing as objective matter. Do you have a source for that is not Christian Science?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's a general truth of quantum physics experiments. There's a double slit experiment. My two fingers are two holes, and I'm shining a laser. That's my other hand, my other finger. Shine laser light through these two holes. And if the particles I'm sending, the laser photons, or it works with electrons, anything you want, and it goes through both holes, and since as it goes through these two holes, coming out of each hole or slit is a kind of like a pebble dropped in a pool makes a ripple. There's a ripple coming out of this one and a ripple coming out of this one. And the two ripples combine, troughs and peaks and all. And what you get is instead of two spots, you get an interference pattern of bright and dark lines. And what that means is that the particle isn't a particle yet. It's a wave, and the two waves interfere with each other, and you get an interference pattern. Okay, so then some people thought, okay, I'm going to look at this slit because it looks like one particle is going through both slits. So I'll look at one of them to see if it goes through this one or not. The interference pattern goes away. Now, you notice you didn't touch the laser, you didn't touch the two slits, you didn't touch the screen. All you did is look. And just the act of looking makes the interference pattern go away. Look, Ma, no hands, you're not even touching the experiment. So, what if you could look? You set up a gizmo and you decide not to look, but it knows you could, and the interference pattern goes away. So, try as they might, quantum physicists have not been able to separate knowledge of which slit from the result on the screen. And just looking makes all the difference. So you say, okay, well, in that case, I'm going to look after the light particle has gone through both slits. And you go down range, the screen's way down here, and you look after the light should have passed through the two slits. Then you use a telescope or something and you look back. Well, the minute you look, it like backloads the past, and you get the interference pattern disappearing, even though you look away afterward. So, in other words, this is just one of the experiments that show that you can't separate what you know from the experiment. And so they had to come up with a whole new name. It's called modern physics. as opposed to classical physics, where you're the experimenter and the experiment is out there. In modern physics, there's no separating what you know from what you're trying to experiment with. That's very simple, but I'll be happy to. Well, it's a bit. There's lots of experiments that support this, but I am very safe in saying there's no local reality, is how a physicist would say it. Local reality is not possible, and when they say reality, what they mean is matter.
Now, in your talk, you mentioned that Mrs. Eddy defines mind, mortal mind, as matter, or matter as mortal mind. Here's a question: how do you pray that mortal mind is a lie, and then reconcile how Jesus handled the devil when the devil tried to tempt him? Is it valid to pray that as long as we are on Earth's preparatory school, we will have to deal with mortal mind?
Well, Jesus dealt with mortal mind by dismissing it and quoting the Bible. And so I think the devil was not an equal opponent in Jesus' thought. An equal opponent is somebody you wrestle with and sword fight with and so on. Jesus didn't treat the devil as an opponent equal to him at all. As a matter of fact, he treated the devil as nothing by saying, "Get thee hence, Satan," by saying, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God, and so on. So he would dismiss the devil. And I think that that's the way we deal with it. We deal with evil not by setting it up as an opponent to wrestle with. What we're wrestling with is to see the unreality of the wrestler. We need to see ourselves as God's child representing omnipotence and dismiss the error. And one good way to do that, which Jesus did over and over and over again, is remove the person from the error. If you can do that, the error's destroyed. It's like one with a whole bunch of zeros. My Christian Science teacher, Mr. Wuth, once said, get rid of the one. It's a lot easier than you have 1,000 problems and you have 999 and you deal with that one, and 998 and deal with that. He said, get rid of the one and then you just have zeros. Well, the one is personality, the personalization of error, and it doesn't exist. So that's the way to undermine error, but never allow it to become an equal partner in a struggle. The yin yang idea of Taoism is that, every white has a little black and every black has a little white and so on. But it isn't a balance of evil with good. What it is a balance of, like, we'll take light. Light doesn't balance darkness. Light photons are particles of light. Dark photons don't exist. There's no such thing as a particle of dark. There's no argument when you turn a light on in a room. How long does the argument last? Not very long. And Jesus said to light a candle and don't hide it, put it so everyone can see it. Well, he was saying the darkness isn't fighting you. The light automatically, because it's real and there's no such thing as dark particles to fight with light particles, then the light wins automatically. And that's where we have to arrive. The struggle is seeing that, not achieving it. It's already true. We have to see it, but we don't have to make it true.
Okay, now here's a question that relates to various topics, in one in particular, of the Bible lesson sermons that Christian Scientists study. And the one that was in effect last week is the universe, including man, evolved by atomic force? So this question is, Mrs. Eddy writes in Miscellaneous Writings, page 190, atomic action is mind, capital M, not matter. So does that mean that the answer to the question in last week's lesson, is the universe, including man, evolved by atomic force, is yes?
Yes.
Yes.
That's what it means. To me, it's really interesting. It's what you define atomic force to be or perceive it to
Yes.
be. But the answer in Mrs. Eddy's quote there on page 190 of Miscellaneous Writings is yes. If infinite atomic force is infinite mind, and by atomic meaning the most fundamental substance, that's the definition of atomic, the most fundamental substance, then in that sense, yes. The answer is yes, which comes as a surprise. I said no for years before I found that quote.
Yes. Now, you shared several fascinating experiences about how ideas arrived in the course of your career when there was a dead end, materially speaking.
Yeah.
While you were waiting for an answer to come, what in particular do you do? You said you listen, but do you pray? Do you talk to God? Exactly how does that happen? Do you listen quietly? What do you do?
Well, I open up to infinity. I don't go into thought, I go out, and I just try and get a sense of the infinite mind. The idea comes or it doesn't. But if it doesn't, and I feel I've gotten this comprehension of the infinite mind, not intellectual acceptance, comprehension, then I go about my day. And I know that the idea will tap me on the shoulder sooner or later when I need it. But the first thing I do is just recognize that the infinite divine mind is the source of all ideas. And so I kind of just I throw myself in front of the infinite and say, okay, ready when you are. And sometimes I do long prayer, but most of the time that I get a feeling that's enough. Okay, I'll answer you. And it may be an hour later, maybe a day later, but I feel like I get a mental tap on the shoulder and go, here it is. I really do recommend, especially if you're going into an idea job, that you learn Christian Science. And not because it will get you a raise, but because it will answer all problems. And a person that can do that is, you're going to have success in what you're trying to do.
This questioner quotes Mary Baker Eddy in an amazingly prescient statement, as the questioner puts it. We tread on forces, withdraw them, and creation must collapse. And now this predates quantum mechanics, which says basically the same thing. Is that correct?
Well, yes, the idea of the there's a gold foil experiment, but Rutherford did, and he basically shot alpha particles, which are helium atoms, at gold foil, and it went through. And they thought that the atom was a pudding, like a pudding of positrons, like a pudding of protons with electrons embedded in it, in which case, you should have expected some of the electrons, some of the alpha particles to bounce off. Nothing bounced off. Almost all of them went through, except every now and then one would bounce straight back at him, 180 degrees. And it's like, well, the only model that worked there was you have like a raisin and you have a dust mote and you put them in a large church, and that's the model of the atom, mostly empty space. So if you get up to the early part of the 20th century, within the first decade or so, the model of the atom was mostly nothing, mostly empty space. Well, quantum physics takes the next step and says, well, not only is it mostly empty space, the particles don't exist until you measure them. Now, that's one of the 12 or 15 interpretations of quantum physics, but it basically says that that's the mainstream interpretation called the Copenhagen interpretation after Niels Bohr, who argued with Einstein all his life. And but basically, the idea is that not only is matter mostly nothing, that current theory says it doesn't exist until somebody measures it. And measurement looks like it has to involve consciousness. So you can see where things have come as far as like the nothingness of matter. And they're not going back. These are experimental results. Experiments, you don't get to retract a correctly done experimental result. So it's not, this idea of the nothingness of matter is not dependent on the quantum interpretation. There are many interpretations of quantum physics, each one weirder than the next. That sounds illogical, but that's the only way I can put it. And but these results that I quote, no local reality, in other words, no matter that is confinable in the normal speed of light universe, is possible. And this is experimental. This is not interpretational.
Here's the astronomical question. The astronomers launching the gigantic new telescope tomorrow are hoping to see the edge of the universe or the very beginning of time. What do you expect they will see?
Well, for the first 380,000 years since the Big Bang, the universe was so hot and broiling and all that you really couldn't see through it. So the universe became transparent at 380,000 years after the Big Bang. So they really can't see beyond that, but they can see back to their early universe and before galaxies formed. So James Webb Space Telescope will probably be about 100 times as powerful as the Hubble. And we can expect gorgeous pictures and lots of studies. It may be able to detect the atmospheres of extrasolar planets. It may be able to look back to within, 400,000 years of the Big Bang. And we're going to learn a lot. If you want to look back farther than that, you have to see through the non-transparent early universe. The universe became transparent, as I said, at 380,000 years. If you want to look back beyond that, you can use gravitational probes. Gravitational wave probes will be able to look back maybe a few seconds after the Big Bang. And so, but gravity wave astronomy is brand new. It's only came online, several years ago. So we don't have anything that's going back that far in the immediate future, but, James Webb is a good step in the right direction.
Okay, we're coming near the end of the questions, and here is one that refers to one of the works of Mary Baker Eddy called No and Yes. Mm-hmm. And she says, man is a celestial, and in the spiritual universe, he is forever individual and forever harmonious. End of quote. This seems to agree with the questioner's takeaway from your talk in the sense of thinking of man as a star and or light. In Science and Health, Mary Baker Eddy also says that Jesus Christ came to teach the science of celestial being. Can you expand on this theme a bit, please?
Sure. Yeah. The idea of a star, material stars are made of gas and dust and that sort of thing, but when we look at the Christmas story, star represents rebirth and an omnipotence that is creating you in the image and likeness of God all the time, and that this is an ongoing creation. And so the idea just suddenly flashed when I looked up at the Milky Way that everyone has their Christmas star because everyone deserves that gift from God. And the big gift is that God is not a forgetful, infinite mind, or it wouldn't be infinite. So therefore, you can't be forgotten, and therefore you're immortal. And you say, well, but are there others of me? Well, I tell Sunday school students, if you think of yourself materially, if everybody held hands and jumped in the ocean, all the humans, the ocean would rise less than a quarter of an inch. That's not very impressive materially, is it? And yet, if we could fit, if we held the volume of the sun and dropped Earths in, we could fit 1 million of them in the sun. And yet, if we held the giant star Betelgeuse, we could drop 100 million suns inside Betelgeuse. And Betelgeuse isn't as big as Altair and so on. So you kind of get the idea that if we look at ourselves, well, if you count all the stars in the Milky Way and never slept, it would take you over 10,000 years. So there really are more stars than grains of sand on all the beaches of the world that we know of. And wait till James Webb starts counting. So, but they're each individual. If you look at yourself spiritually as a unique idea, then you have infinite value because you're one of a kind. You know, you can see that if you have a rarer and rarer thing, that it gains in value. Well, you're the rarest. Every idea of God is the rarest thing in the universe, and therefore infinitely valuable because there's one of a kind. And you say, well, how can that possibly be? Well, because there's only one infinite mind. Can a mind think of something that unlike itself? God does not know how to create another you. Because God is of a kind idea. So what is creation? Creation is God saying, this is what I am, this is what I am, and this is what I am. And those ideas are unique and irreplaceable. So creation is an ongoing thing. So Merry Christmas. You can say it every day of the year.
Well, certainly, Merry Christmas to you. You've given us a launching pad for further infinite ideas and development. And would you have just a few final words before we bid everyone good night?
Well, I would say, because you're one of a kind, they're infinitely valuable. And no matter what you do, maybe someday you'll be emperor or empress of the galaxy, or president of the little country on a blue dot. It doesn't matter. The perspective is that you are already infinitely valuable by being yourself. And to me, Christmas is, especially, you know, with the Christmas star and all, Christmas is the great gift of God that sent Christ Jesus and Mrs. Eddy and others to us to say, guess what? You are of infinite value, and I will never let you disappear. The gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. And that, I would say, is the big gift of Christmas. That's the big takeaway. Don't forget who you are. And don't forget, regardless of what other things you want to achieve, be yourself. Because you're completing the infinitude of God when you're being your individual self of infinite value.
Thank you. That's an infinite gift for us all. Merry Christmas to all of you, and thank you for joining us. And thank you, Dr. Laurance Doyle.
Thank you guys for joining us. It was a lot of fun.